Mr Chairman.
I call the honourable member Jan Logie.
And I too would like to speak to some of the overarching issues that relate to reviewable tenancies and the approach that this government is taking in relation to state housing. I think they have made a major shift in away from our common understanding of the purpose of state housing and the role of our government in providing housing. And I would like to remind the House that it was a national government that initially established some of our state housing policy and also opposed the extension of urban limits as an approach to providing more housing, because they recognised that as a country we desperately need to have secure, healthy housing for our population, and that when we have that we all benefit, and that if we put people, the most vulnerable people, out on the fringes, they become more vulnerable because they are reliant on extra transport, and that's often not there, as well as, and that undermines their ability to participate more widely in the community. So this government really has lost its way, and this bill is very significant demonstration of that. What this does is sets up a review of tenure for state housing, and the Minister has talked about examples of very wealthy people in state houses, and what a travesty that is. So how shocking, and when we have this limited resource, then we need to make sure those people aren't taking up that resource. But I would like to remind the Minister that actually this bill does a lot more than that. It will review the tenancies of families with children. It will put their tenancies at risk. It potentially reviews, though they've told us that there is some leniency available in this, though it's not spelt out, for them to protect older New Zealanders in that house so that they won't be kicked out. But it's not protected in this bill. It also, they've told us that they'll protect people with disabilities and or mental health issues, but it's not written in this bill. What this bill does is sets up a process where people will feel insecure, and some people will be kicked out of their houses, and families with children will lose security of tenure. And the Minister's shaking his head, but that's what's in this bill. And that has really significant costs for those families and for all of us. And I've been a renter most of my life, and the way that the private rental market operates in this country is that there's a lot of churn. And while I was renting, I was often moving twice a year, just for the reasons of the landlord situation changing, or my situation changing, or the rent going up. And the cost of that is huge, to get the movers, to put on the power, and that's what we're potentially putting people into, that cycle, because the private rental market is overinflated and the condition of the housing is worse. So we're putting out some of our most vulnerable families into exceptionally vulnerable situations, and we're increasing their costs, which is taking money away from those families with the least in this country. And I don't think that's consistent with the vision that we all share as New Zealanders of kind of this idea of a society where we're all looked after. This bill does not look after our most vulnerable people, and it doesn't look after our vision of an inclusive society. The University of Otago and the School of Medicine were very clear in their message in response to this policy point, in saying that the longer a family is able to stay in a state house, the better the health outcomes for children. This bill is going to cost the health of our most vulnerable children. And the government's putting in these token efforts around rheumatic fever, when we know one of the main drivers of rheumatic fever is overcrowding and poor quality housing. And here we are putting through a bill that actually threatens initiatives that might help the health of those children. That is dishonest. To put forward some money in here and say, we really care about this issue, we're doing something, and to do something that undermines it on the other hand.
Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I want to talk about the reviewable tenancies as well in part one of this bill, and I've been looking through the